Before we get started, let's update our table of contents. We are adding a new entry to page 20. The date is 11/18. The entry is Model Fossil Observations, Part 2, on page 20. You will also be setting up page 20 next. Good morning, 4th grade. So today we are going to be paleontologists. Paleontologists are scientists that dig through rocks and find fossils. We are going to be breaking through each of our rocks and discovering the different fossils that our organisms created.
Remember, an organism is any type of animal or plant.
We were able to create 4 different fossils using our shell organisms. So we're going to start out by breaking up these cups and finding out what fossils were created.
A fossil is any remains or an imprint of an organism found on the Earth's crust.
So let's get ready to discover. This is fossil number 1. I'm going to break up the rock. Cut. Notice how there are 2 separate layers. The gray layer at the bottom is the oldest layer, and the one at the top is the most recent or the new layer. This is called superposition. Superposition is when the rocks at the bottom are older than the ones at the top. See, it's already breaking apart. So let's break it up and see what we are able to find. I am going to show you the mold of our fossil first. The mold is where the organism created the space. This is what we looked at when we first created our fossil. See how it is smooth, and then this area kind of has a hole at the bottom? This is the mold. The mold is where the organism created its space. Now we have our cast. This is the cast of the fossil. You can see it is kind of a 3D shape, and you can feel the shape of our shell.
You will now draw a picture of fossil 1 in your science journal. You will draw your observation of fossil 1 in box 1 labeled fossil number 1.
This is the organism that was used to create this fossil, and we can see it created the same shape as the bump that exists on this shell. This is the cast of the shell. The cast of the shell was created because the sediment, or this material of rock that fell on top, was able to fill up the space in the mold and created this fossil. Let's take a look at what our organism number 2 created. Let's break it up. Ooh. Now we are going to break up these 2 layers. Remember, the gray layer is the older layer, and the white area is the newest layer of sediment. Now let's break it up. Ooh. This is the mode of fossil number 2. We can see that when we placed it inside, it left this bumpy area right here, and it left this empty space. Now let's take a look at the cast.
A cast is a fossil that is formed by rock minerals that fill an empty space created by an imprint of an organism. Casts are usually 3D.
This is the cast that was created by fossil number 2. This cast was created because when we added this new layer of sediment on top of our mold, it was able to fill up the empty space. See where this empty space is right here? That is where the hole was. And then if you take a close look here, you can see the top layer of our fossil. Now, I noticed that we can see an outline of what our fossil looks like, but can we see a color? No, we can't really see the color. We only see an outline of the shape of the organism.
You will now add your observation of fossil 2 in your science journal. You will draw a picture of what you notice about fossil 2 in box number 2.
Fossils only show us the shapes of different organisms. They don't show us the color of an organism. They only show us the shape and how the organism made its imprint on the mud. Now let's look at the fossil that we created for organism 3. Let's break it apart. Again, we can see that we have 2 layers. The gray layer on the bottom, it is the oldest layer, and the white at the top is the newer layer. This is called superposition. Superposition tells us that the oldest layer on the rock is on the bottom and the newer layer is on top. Let's see what kind of fossil this created. Ooh. This is the mold that was created with organism 3. We can see a little bit of the little lines. We can see a bit of the lines that were on the organism. We can see them going all around. This is the mold that fossil number 3 created. I will now show you the cast. The cast filled up the space in the mold and created like a 3D shape of the fossil. This is the fossil cast of organism 3. You can feel the different lines that were on the fossil. We can see a bit of the shape. Remember, this fossil, all of it did not fit on the cup, so we only got a part of what the fossil looked like. We can see that this fossil had many different lines going across of it, just like our organism did.
You will now add your observations of fossil 3 to your science journal. You will draw a picture of fossil 3 in box 3 of your fossil journal.
Now it is time to reveal our fossil for organism 4. Again, we see that there are 2 layers. The one on the bottom is the oldest, and the one on the top is the new layer of rock. This is called, if you said superposition, you are correct. Superposition tells us that the oldest layer of rock is at the bottom and the new ones are at top. Let's open up our fossil to see what was created. We dropped our organism into our clay. We saw that it was able to capture some of the pointy parts and it kind of got its shape, but it got a lot of the lines. This is the mold that organism 3 created.
A mold is a type of fossil that is created by the empty space an organism leaves when it is imprinted on sediment rock.
Now let's look at the cast that was created by the layer that was added on top. This is the cast of organism 3. We see that when we added this layer on top of the clay, it filled the empty spots on the mold and created an outline that looks very similar to the pointy parts and lines of shell number 4.
You will now add your observation of fossil 4 in your science journal. You will now draw a picture of what you notice in fossil 4 in box 4.
Now let's take a close look at all of our fossils and its the organism. So this was organism number 1. And this is fossil number 1. Notice how it looks very similar to the shape. This is organism number 2. And this is the fossil that organism number 2 created. You can see how it has the bump. Now, when we felt organism 2, it did have a pattern of waves, but it wasn't bumpy, so the imprint of it wasn't recorded on our fossil.
That tells me that we can only see the imprint but not the color of an organism on a fossil.
Organism number 3. Organism 3 had lines, and these lines were very bumpy. And when we take a look at fossil number 3, we notice that the lines were also imprinted on our fossil and were also created there. Look at organism 4. We noticed that it had a lot of lines and it was very bumpy. And then when we take a look at our fossil cast number 4, we are again able to see those little pointy tops and the lines that were created. We were able to create our own fossils in class, but this is only a model of how real fossils were created long ago. Fossils that were made from millions of years ago did not just form overnight. These fossils took many years, millions and millions of years, to turn into hard rock like the one we had here. It is now time for us to answer our focus question. Turn to page 16 so we can discuss fossils and answer our question in our journal. So we have learned a lot about fossils. We have seen how they are made, how they leave imprints in mud, and over millions of years, more layers are added on top, causing these imprints to get to harden and turn into rock. We have also learned that fossils are kind of like a puzzle piece. They tell us bits and pieces about the past of our Earth. Based on all this information we have learned, we can now answer our focus question. Our focus question is, how do fossils get in rocks? And what can they tell us about our past? Through our experiment, we are able to see that fossils are caused by different organisms like animals or plants creating their imprints by being buried in sediment. When these organisms decompose, they create in mold. As years pass, minerals are able to fill inside the mold as the rock hardens, helping geologists and paleontologists find those rock fossils in present day. The fossils serve as evidence of what our Earth was millions of years ago. Geologists and paleontologists find fossils in different areas. They are able to put together parts of the puzzle. They are able to determine what kind of animal or what kind of organism was in that environment. Depending on the fossil, they can be able to determine what kinds of different plants existed, or what kind of food an animal ate, or how many feet and how fast was it able to walk, and what other animals lived around. Now turn to page 16, or the page where you wrote your fossil focus question. How do fossils get in rocks, and what can they tell us about the past? Let's answer our focus question in our journal. Organisms are buried in the ground. They make imprints that create a mold. Minerals fill the space, creating a rock fossil. Fossils are evidence of our past. They tell us information about Earth and animals from millions of years ago.